Hi, guys, and welcome to Let's Tell Their Story, the podcast where we explore some of the most baffling and intriguing and haunting cases that have never been solved, and sometimes ones that eventually did get solved. It's me, Casey. As I've discussed before, especially during the Bighorn episodes, that jurisdiction gets iffy from time to time, and in this case, it's even more of a jurisdiction issue, since this isn't just a normal county, state, federal jurisdiction, but rather a building belonging to one country and the land that it sits on belonging to another country all the way around the world, and a continent that is almost inhabitable. We'll be discussing the alleged only homicide to ever take place on the continent of Antarctica. Rodney David Marks was born March 13th, 1968, to Paul and Ray Marks of Geelong, Victoria in Australia. I'm Australian listeners, I hope I said Geelong right. I apologize if I didn't. I really didn't look it up. I'm just going off on how I think it should be pronounced. Rodney was a typical Australian teenage boy who enjoyed surfing, was an avid music fan of the 90s alternative culture that was part of the 90s. He loved to watch Aussie rules football, but what stood out to everyone around Rodney was his intelligence. Rodney had earned himself a scholarship to a prestigious private school as a teenager, and it was there that he expressed an extreme interest in science. Rodney received his education from University of Melbourne, where he earned his bachelor's degree in astronomy along with first-class honors, and later continued his schooling and obtained his PhD in physics from the University of New South Wales, making him an official astrophysicist. He even wrote his thesis about the South Pole. In the winter of 1997 through 1998, Rodney spent that winter over at the South Pole Why would I say over? It's down at the South Pole. Observing before becoming employed with the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, a research project for the University of Chicago as an astrophysicist working on the Antarctic submillimeter telescope and remote observatory, also known as ASTRO. He was working as part of the Chicago Center of Astrophysical Research in Antarctica, or known as CARA, and was involved in their South Pole Infrared Explorer project known as SPIREX. While Rodney was wintering his first year in Antarctica, he met a young woman named Sonia Walter, a maintenance specialist at the station. The two became so close that they began dating, and when Rodney volunteered to winter again in Antarctica, Sonia decided she also was going to winter there just to be with Rodney. The two were inseparable. Right before leaving for Antarctica, they both decided they were going to dye their hair. Rodney chose purple and Sonia chose a bright green. The two had been making plans to marry and agreed that as soon as they could return home, they would spend the rest of their lives together as a married couple. Unfortunately, only one of them would make it home alive. Okay, so wintering in Antarctica isn't for the faint of heart, and what exactly does that mean or entail? Well, most of us in the northern hemisphere are enjoying our spring, summer, and fall months with vacations, while in the South Pole, from March to November, the temperatures get below negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is while in July most of us are bitching about it being over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Really, it's not that hot. It's the humidity. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Due to the freezing temps and the blowing snow, very few, if any, planes are willing to venture in the South Pole during this time. So the few that inhabit this continent for a year, possibly two, will have their supplies worth brought in at the beginning of their years of settlement. During the wintering, there is typically anywhere from 150 to 200 people inhabiting the continent, leaving only a skeleton crew of scientists at the Amundsen Scott Station. With Rodney's second winter over in Antarctica, from November 1999 to November 2000, he was working directly with the Smithsonian Astrophysical Laboratory, where he was hands-on working with Astro, and he took advantage of the 1.7 meter off-axis telescope at the South Pole's planetary position that surveyed the southern galactic plane, and that was exactly what Rodney's thesis was written about. By all accounts, Rodney played an important role that year for Astro. He produced the most successful winter observing season ever. They ran the observatory. He ran the observatory and ran data. He was also helping the project become more efficient than they'd ever seen it. Rodney was even working on new observational techniques. Rodney's intelligence never made him feel as though he was inferior to others. And in his off hours, he socialized with everyone, including the carpenters and plumbers that were on staff. He would drink whiskey with them, smoke cigarettes, and play poker. Even with his PhD, Rodney had his own vices. He had Tourette's. Not many had picked up on the fact that he had Tourette's. It is something that Rodney was very self-conscious of, and sometimes he would drink alcohol to alleviate his symptoms. However, it is not known what his tics were. Otherwise, he was more of a social drinker that drank to let loose and have fun, but he did tend to have the habit of binge drinking while he was social drinking. On May 11th, 2000, as dinner approached, Rodney ventured through what was known as the dark sector between the observatory and the station that he lived in. At the time, he began to feel unwell. He eventually made it to the galley to eat dinner with Sonia, who remembered Rodney complaining how he wasn't feeling well and that his eyes were really irritating him. As many of us, Rodney turned into bed early that night, hoping that rest was all he needed and that he would be feeling better the next day. However, that wasn't the case. He was up several times through the night, and on May 12th at 5:30 a.m., he woke up for the day. This was due to the fact that he was having troubles breathing, and once he began to vomit up blood, he sought out the station's medical facility doctor. When the doctor had seen Rodney, he wrote off Rodney's symptoms as alcohol withdrawal. Now, Rodney was giving off to the doctors that he was nervous, anxious, and upset. And the doctor chalked this out to Rodney just having a typical stress-induced illness. And the doctor eventually gave Rodney an antipsychotic injection to calm him down and sent Rodney back to his quarters to try and sleep off the stress-induced illness. Rodney continued to get worse throughout the day. His body was slowly giving out on him. As his blood pressure was incredibly low, he was becoming more irritable and dizzy. He was weak and fatigued, increasingly nauseous with severe abdominal pain, and breathing was becoming even more difficult. But the symptom that was bothering Rodney the most was the pain in his eyes. It was so bad that he started wearing sunglasses indoors just to function. But just a few hours later, Rodney would lose his eyesight altogether. Rodney had gone to see the doctor on site two more times that day. The doctor was so confused that without a more experienced medical wing, the doctor wasn't sure what he could do for Rodney. He did, however, reach out to medical experts via the satellite, but it was no help as nobody responded. That afternoon would become one of the crew's most furied days of the winter over, as the worst of Rodney's illness would come to light. Since the doctor was unable to treat Rodney, since all his symptoms were at the point of no return, the doctor injected Rodney with another antipsychotic, this one called Haldol. Hoping to relieve Rodney's symptoms, which the Haldol did seem to be working, it was short-lived. As the Haldol seemed to be working, Rodney tried to sit up and then quit breathing altogether. The station's trauma team was called in to help, and over the next 45 minutes, CPR efforts were made to attempt to resuscitate 32-year-old Rodney Marks. Their attempts did not pay off, and around 6 p.m. local time, based on the New Zealand time zone, Rodney passed due to total heart failure. At first, it was said that Rodney had died of natural causes that allegedly were the onset of his alcohol consumption. The NSF, the National Science Foundation, prematurely made a statement stating that there was nothing that suggested Rodney's death was related to his work, to the environment at the South Pole, or to any toxic or infectious agents. Now, I say premature for a reason. Rodney's blood was never analyzed due to the chemistry analyzer at the medical facility at the station was never activated, let alone used during the whole ordeal of Rodney's illness. And this was due to the fact that the Kodak Actinium had a dead lithium battery that had died sometime previously, and it would have taken several hours to recalibrate the laser. Wow. Which the medical staff nor did Rodney have. Since this is May in the Antarctic, it's in the depths of winter there, and there would be no flights in or out of the station until later that year. So Rodney's body was moved onto a sled outdoors, where his remains were able to freeze until the weather cleared up for him to be flown to New Zealand for an autopsy in November 2000. I want to mention that Rodney's body didn't just stay on a sled outside in the freezing temperatures. His friends and colleagues did band together and made him a casket out of oak that laid under the stars that Rodney had dedicated his life to studying. Okay, now remember in the beginning I made the comment about jurisdictions and what a nightmare they can be. Well, this one probably takes the cake. Antarctica is governed under what is known as the Antarctic Treaty System that was signed into law in 1959 and was put into effect 2 years later during the height of the Cold War. Now, what exactly does this treaty do? It sets Antarctica apart from the rest of the world, as it has banned all military activity on the continent, making Antarctica a scientific preserve. As you can imagine, most nations have some invested interest in Antarctica. With this treaty, just to name a few of those nations, are the United States, most of Europe, Russia, and Australia. However, many other nations have made claims on Antarctica, such as New Zealand and Norway. Now, these claims are not supported by the treaty, yet the nations refuse to let go of their claims, and that is what makes Rodney Marks' death not only intriguing, but also why there will never be a true straight answer as to what really happened to him, other than what the future autopsy will reveal. It's also important to make note that with this treaty, everyone in Antarctica is governed under the laws of their nation, basically meaning that what, if any, crime that you may commit in or on Antarctica, you would be tried in your own nation or country's court system for the crimes that you are accused of. This also applies to those that have claims on the land that are not observed through the treaty. So this leads back to Rodney. He was an Australian citizen who, at an American-run station, he also died at that station, and the station just so happens to be on the territory of land that is claimed by New Zealand. Can we say jurisdiction shit show? Now, Australia and the United States agreed that the coroner's inquest be held in New Zealand since they were the first government to receive Rodney's remains. It was at the facility in Christchurch, New Zealand, which was the base for American activities in Antarctica, where the forensic pathologist that examined Rodney's remains discovered that his death was anything but natural causes. His bloodstream contained approximately 150 milliliters of methanol, well beyond a lethal dose for Rodney's body size. Rodney was known for using methanol to clean his lenses of his telescopes that he worked with, yet it's unknown how it entered his bloodstream. Okay, a little science lesson here, and trust me, I don't want to give you a science lesson because I hate science, but this is an important science lesson. So 10 milliliters of pure methanol will destroy the optic nerve and can cause permanent blindness. And 100 milliliters is more than a lethal dose. And Rodney had consumed 150 milliliters. But when and how would to this day remain a mystery. By the time New Zealand began to launch their own investigation into the methanol poisoning on Rodney Marks, everyone that had been working with Rodney had headed back to their own nations or land countries, and those nations all operate under different jurisdictions and legal codes. And any possible evidence that could have been a potential crime scene was now gone. Since Rodney's room was now occupied by a new scientist, along with his workstation, most of his belongings had been sent back to his family in Australia, and what remained was disposed of. Any evidence that may have been left was now forever gone. Over the years, there has been a multitude of speculations and theories as to what may have happened to Rodney Marks, the astrophysicist from down under that went way down under. Speculations that his liquor was spiked with methanol, that he chose one of the most painful, horrific suicides. He may have accidentally grabbed the wrong bottle while working at the observatory. With all the colleagues having returned to their own nations and under their own laws, they don't have to speak with the New Zealand government, and only 13 of the 49 colleagues cooperated with the New Zealand government. For whatever reason, the rest refused. Now, New Zealand weren't the only ones conducting investigations over the next few years. It appeared the U.S. officials also conducted their own investigation, and the results of the investigation to this day remain closely guarded. In the Antarctic, there is a 260-meter mountain that has been forever immortalized as Marks Mount. That is remembered for the work that Rodney Marks accomplished in the 2 winter overs he was in the process of doing when unfortunate circumstances took his life. Rodney was finally returned to his family in his native nation of Australia, where for a second time his remains would be buried, only this time in his final resting place, just off the shores that he served as a kid growing up in Geelong. And that has been the story of Rodney Marks, the first and only possible murder in the Antarctic that caused Rodney Marks 36 hours of hell in the coldest place on the planet. as always, stay safe, but stay curious.